Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for yet another exciting edition of the Pure Digital Passion Podcast with Moses Kemibaro. And today I'm excited, first of all, to tell you guys that I'm actually at Semabox, which is Kenya's premier podcasting studio. And this is the first time I'm doing it with them here, so I'm really excited about that. So I think the audio quality and the general production quality should be significantly better than what I normally do. But my guest today is somebody who I think is going to be a very interesting guest. His name is Doug. Doug works with a company called SYSPRO. SYSPRO is a business that was established in South Africa in the late 70s, primarily providing different types of ERP solutions. And Doug Hunter is head of Customer and Ecosystem Enablement at SYSPRO. Thank you for joining us, Doug.
Pleasure, thank you.
So Doug basically is responsible for support, consulting, and education around the SYSPRO's channel partners. Of course, SYSPRO works with a broad range of customers across Sub-Saharan Africa in different segments and industries. At the heart, he's a manufacturing and logistics business professional. In fact, just before we started the podcast, we were talking a little bit about his background. And, you know, in addition to being an IT expert, he's also clearly somebody who understands manufacturing and the core supply chains, that word that we now use so fluently after our pandemic moments, and has a passion to help companies discover and innovate through people, processes, and appropriate business IT. So, Doug, I'd like to start off maybe just a little bit more about you as a person. You know, can you tell us a little bit more about your background professionally and personally, and how you got here to SYSPRO?
Yeah, so I'm a Scotsman, which you can probably hear, but I've lived in South Africa since 1984.
Wow.
And I came out to South Africa for 3 to 5 years, but I must have had a single ticket because I didn't go back.
But what is it that you loved about South Africa that kept you there?
Well, I was young enough to feel that it was very different to Glasgow, where I came from. I was involved in the engineering manufacturing industry, but very heavy engineering, which I loved. And I came out to see I actually met some South African subcontractors who came to see us.
Okay.
And they told me a story, and I thought, well, looks like a good chance. And my brother had been in Kenya before that, so I came to South Africa and started working in manufacturing companies in Johannesburg. And then when I got here, the adoption of IT was not as much as it was in the UK. And so I found I had quite a lot of experience that people needed. And the companies I worked for initially, I had to help implement the IT, the business IT, which was the early days of MRP, or Material Requirements Planning, which became ERP. So that's how I got here. And because of that, I ended up in the IT industry. So about half of my life, I've been doing a real job in the manufacturing industry or in supply chain. And the rest of the time, I've worked for IT companies like SYSPRO to help customers apply it properly, because they often don't.
So for you, really, it sounds really interesting, because that means you really understand what the nuts and bolts are in the business itself, and then you're able to overlay the knowledge of technology and how to optimize that, right?
Yeah, and some of it, yes, I suppose my experience is quite good on the process side. So I know what the business processes are, and I've actually used them. You know, I've had to manage them and use the software. So it does help understand the idiosyncrasies of each business, because although they use similar processes, they're all different. People compete on different bases, you know. So it does help. And as I say, excuse me, I like to help them apply IT properly. So often people buy too much and try and do too much, or they don't buy relevant stuff. You know, you really have to buy the right stuff.
Great. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about SYSPRO, the company that you're representing here today. You know, what are your main offerings? What are the problems that you solve for your customers? And what sort of gaps do you think you fill, you know, locally, region, globally? Because I think when I think about the ERP space, it seems to me there are a lot of, you know, sometimes gargantuan companies, you know, like the SAPs and so forth. You have smaller ERP players regionally and locally. But I think SYSPRO has some unique aspects to what you offer the market.
Yes, we do. So you're quite right about the positioning of IT companies, especially business IT and enterprise resource planning. What does it mean? You said it at the start, it helps enable your supply chain, so the procurement, the manufacturing, and the distribution, and in parallel, the financials. And they all do the same thing, but the gargantuan companies, one of whom I've worked for, just go for bigger scale companies. So in some respects, the market is better for SYSPRO because we're more appropriately sized for the regions we work in. The difference we have most of the people that work in SYSPRO have got a knowledge of manufacturing, not necessarily having worked in it, but we make sure they understand, even the developers, what a manufacturing company does and what distribution's about and inventory. And that means we're quite good at writing code, which is done mostly in Johannesburg and some in Britain. So I think the people, but I think actually for us who work there, for the ExCo, we believe our customers are one of our competitive advantages, because you deal with the size of company. I mean, they're big companies in Africa, but they might not be big in California, you know. Although we do have business in California as well, but because of our scale, you end up talking to people from the top floor to the shop floor. And that's not that simple to do if you don't know what you're talking about. So we have to make sure our consultants who implement have met some of the, walked around factories, understood some of the problems personally with the people they deal with. So I would say that what we do, it makes a difference. We get into the trench with the customer, feel their pain, and help enable what will get them out of their pain, because it is a painful journey putting in IT systems into a company. Rather than, I think, the traditional view of IT is people stand above the hole that the customer's in and they shout down and tell you what to do. And so I've been in both worlds. In SYSPRO, we're much better at getting into the trench with the customer. It really is the only way, because it's tough. And we deal with quite a lot of people who haven't actually done much IT implementation before. So there's a kind of discovery process, a learning together. So you might not understand their business fully, but you pick it up fairly quickly and they pick up the IT that's relevant. So it works quite well.
So it almost sounds like you do a lot of hand-holding, a lot of education, hand-holding, taking the client through.
Yeah, I think, Moses, what you have to do with IT is, first of all, you've got to scope a project. So that's where you really have to work out what people need. And I think companies are guilty of pushing what they sell rather than enabling what the customer needs. So they might focus on, for example, they're an automotive supply company or something. So they make bits for car companies, for the OEMs. And that's quite a different environment to making food, making cheese, dairies. We deal with a lot of dairies in Kenya, for example. And so you do have to get to know the customer properly. And I think typically in the past, mostly, companies push what their software is about. They're more system-driven than customer-driven.
Yeah, that's really good to hear, because I think that customer orientation, of course, makes you give them a more effective solution, but you're not sort of forcing them into a box that they may not fit right for them. I'm really curious because, again, South Africa has a reputation, I think, historically, of having technology companies that have gone on to be global players. I remember in my early career, one of the names that always came up was Dimension Data, which is still a very significant business. And of course, reading up on SYSPRO, late 70s founded, you're talking about a geographical footprint that seems to go well beyond Africa. And I'm just curious, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that dynamic. How does a startup from South Africa in the form of SYSPRO become a global player in the ERP space? I don't know if there's anything interesting there that you might share with us.
Yeah, well, what I saw when I came here was in South Africa, but even more in East Africa, the education was far better here. So people are much more ready to innovate. Technology was taken up, I think, pretty quickly here. You had a lot of funding of from the Amazons, the Googles, all of that, to try and help youngsters learn how to code and learn how to implement. Of course, you've got M-Pesa, which was before anyone. In South Africa, I think they've got a horrible history, and I think what they had to do was transform a Neanderthal, old, out-of-date, monopolistic economy into a realistic, competitive global economy. So it was quite a good place for Phil Duff, who started the company. It was quite a good place to actually start writing a software package. And I think people in Africa, I certainly saw it in South Africa, they're much more willing to take a challenge. I mean, obviously they'd work in the UK, and there's a lot more appetite for risk and appetite for change in a lot of the African companies we deal with. That doesn't mean they're all ahead, and it doesn't mean they've all done it very well. It depends how you look after them, but that's what I thought, that, Dimension Data, you're right, they effectively supplied the internet with hardware, which is unbelievable in the early days, obviously. There's
Yes,
quite a few. The Cisco and all these people, they were the Cisco distributors, not SYSPRO, but Cisco. And I mean, I've been visiting guys today and yesterday here who have been customers for 30 years in Kenya.
With Dimension Data?
No, with us. With
oh,
Cisco.
wow. Okay.
No, not with Cisco, but with SYSPRO. So, you know, we've got, as I say, dairies, paint companies, automotive assemblers. In fact, they assemble the matatus, in fact. Wine. Sorry, that's Ethiopia. So we deal in Ethiopia as well, in Tanzania. We've even got game parks. I don't know why people in game parks would buy an ERP system, but when you look at it, everything that you take into a game park in Tanzania is flown in or driven in. So stock and management of stock and inventory is extremely important. And you've got a whole community. It's like a village.
Wow.
So, you know, I wondered why they bought it. I mean, you think people just book people in and out, but that's pretty easy.
The whole logistics piece.
The whole logistics behind it is.
Yeah.
It's like the airplane industry's got many logistics chains. You know, it's got people, luggage, fuel, maintenance. The tools are so expensive to fix these planes that they schedule the flying of the tools round with the planes to the right airports for the right planes to maintain them to a schedule. So there's, you know, some industries you think, well, why would they use what you're selling? And then you work it out. Like mines, it would be obvious. They're also the same. They've all got little villages or thousands of people living in the mine in the middle of nowhere. And it's critical that you've got the right inventory. So you need systems that can do that, and they can do it. The thing against SYSPRO, it's easier to do with us than some of the bigger players because it's right sized. That's the thing. You know, I'm not saying any of the others are bad, but SYSPRO has got a good niche, and we really focus on manufacturing and distribution. And many of the others focus on financials, or in the space we're in, they focus on financials. Well, the money's not made by your financials. The money's made in your supply chain. You know, and managing the manufacturing process and not overstocking, scheduling properly, making sure you deliver on time, not having recalls. And if you're in the food industry, that's where you make your money. I mean, I'm not saying accounting is wrong, but I've never seen a general ledger being redefined that would really change your business as much as properly sorting out your inventory management or your stock management.
I love the way you've just articulated, you know, what is at the heart of what, you know, you're doing at SYSPRO, which is, you know, manufacturing, distribution, and the bias you have towards those industries. And then, of course, what you said, the right sizing, meaning it's not really for everyone, but there's a certain type of business that's the right fit for the same. I'm just curious, you know, you've sort of hinted to some of your customers in this region. You've talked about dairies. I think you talked about, you know, something in Ethiopia and so forth. But I'm just curious in terms of whether you have any case studies or insights, you know, that you might want to share with us about customers in the region, possibly with a bias to Kenya, and how SYSPRO has managed to sort of transform their businesses.
So certainly. So there's MEDS, which is the Mission for Essential Drugs and Supplies. That means medical drugs, at this stage anyway. They are, I think, our oldest or second oldest customer in South Africa, started by a lady at the side of the roads selling like pills, you know, paracetamol and stuff like that. And eventually they became a faith-based organization. So you think, oh, it's faith-based, it must be inefficient. But it's really a logistics business. And they had our software, but they hadn't implemented it as well as they should, which I guess was probably our problem, our fault in the past. So a few years ago, we went and spoke to them again. And I think in the last 2.5 years, we did two things. One, we've got them to use all the software they need to use it properly, sort their stock. They've got a warehouse that they link into it as well. Their order management, they're much more, they've got much more visibility of what they need to do than they had. They've closed some holes because when you distribute stuff, it sometimes goes out of doors you don't expect. Not saying that I don't really think they had a big problem there, but they had many issues that they needed more of what we had and they hadn't used it. And that's quite typical of companies if you don't keep looking after your customers. So that's really what I do up here, is try and make sure that we are servicing or our partners are servicing them. And with MEDS, we also brought on a new partner who had just started with SYSPRO. They had experience of ERP, but not SYSPRO.
Okay.
So we worked with them to get them a partner. Now they're in there. And the dairies, there's Kenya Wine Agencies, which is part of Distill.
Yeah, I know them well.
Recently Maybe not yet, but recently bought by Distell, was bought by Heineken, which is quite an interesting one. They see it as a route into Africa through Distell, I think, from South Africa. So Kenya wine agencies, same story, management of control, visibility, their accounting. We were talking to them yesterday. The reconciliation of their financials and the control of what they can do on cost is much better than it used to be. But they're a relatively new customer. Ethiopia, just Awash Wines, 1938, oldest wine estate in Ethiopia. Was started after Live Aid, if you remember that.
Yes.
Some of you won't remember it, 1985.
I remember it.
Bob Geldorf. So he did all of that for Ethiopia, and he put some money into this wine farm.
Nice.
So it's his wine farm, basically. But so we don't see Bob Geldorf there. But we've completely transformed what they do. Big challenges with people discipline doing the work, because you have to do transactions if you don't do them. So we're going through, and that's not unusual in a new implementation. You go through, no, I'm scared of this, I don't want to do it. So you mentioned hand-holding. So the hand-holding really comes at the end. You make sure that you go around with them and see that they're doing okay. But there is a mistake there, because if you hand-hold too long, they really expect you to do the work. So you've got to strike a balance of being quite disciplined and saying, we're going to do this for 2 weeks. So you have to help them learn. And really, you just leave them to get on with it. Not because you've stopped getting paid money, but if you don't leave sometime, they don't pick it up properly.
And that really defeats the whole purpose of
exactly.
being
Why would you put in IT to enable your systems if your users wouldn't use it? And it's typically change management type of issues.
Yeah, a lot of cultural transitions, and sometimes some people are more invested in the status quo rather than the new way, right?
Yeah, and we've also got, I suppose it's AB InBev now, we've got breweries all over South Africa. No, sorry, not in South Africa. They're on one of the big players with 3 letters, starting with an S. And but in all of Africa, they put SYSPRO in, so 25 breweries in Africa, not Kenya, unfortunately. And I think we've got 17 in India.
Wow.
And then AB InBev bought them, and they said, okay, we're going with the company that I previously hinted at, but they haven't gone there yet. So that was a good strategy. So we find some companies in South Africa who maybe use the bigger software companies, you know, where it's right sizing again. They use us because it's easier to support. We've got, I mean, it's not, everybody's got support.
Yeah.
In companies, I mean, we can support them, but it's just easier for these, it's easier to make a system that's more user compatible. You know, if you want a lot of information, you've got to put it in to the system. Someone's got to enter the transaction. And if you've got a company of 10,000 people and there's about 2,000 of them using the software, then you'll have quite a focused role that's quite deep. But if you're a 20-user company, you know, you could find the owner's doing the financials and the debtors collection. He's doing like 3 or 4 things, and the manufacturing lady is doing the manufacturing and ordering all the procurement. So you need a system that allows you to do that. So that I think is another factor that we fit better in many places. In fact, if we're in the same room with the really big players and us and some of our competitors, if they're in the same room, somebody's not in the right room. You know?
That's right.
And that's a real problem. People deciding on software without looking at the whole company. You know, if the financial guys focus on it and you don't involve the whole company, especially in a manufacturing company, you know, you've got to have something that works for the manufacturing guys and is not overcomplicated, but it can do the sophistication that you need. So I'm not saying either that we don't have the sophistication, but we probably don't have as many options as some of the big guys, but the guys we deal with don't need it. You know?
I guess it's a question of less is more, in the sense that they're able to get more out of what they actually need versus all the superfluous features and functionalities that could come with the platform. Right?
Unfortunately, all software companies sell software before it's ready because you have to create the market. It's actually also an important part of the industry, because you need to know if you're buying software or a business software, that company's keeping up with the latest trends. You must write about that, you know, using the right things, getting into First of all, it was mobility. Now it's big data, it's blockchain, all sorts of things.
Yes.
So all of that is something a proper software company will be involved in. So I'm pleased we do that. And you might not use it yet, but you may use it in the future, or it allows you to grow with the software company, and that's important. You don't want to be static, because if you get software and you don't keep going with it as a partnership, you can end up the software becomes a constraint.
That's true, especially when a business has massively scaled up and new geographies, new things happening, new products, then they need that, right?
Yeah, and growth. I mean, you get bigger, you do more sophisticated things, so you start using more of the features and functions.
Yeah.
So
it's so interesting. The other day, I came across an interesting podcast. It's called Masters of Scale, and I think it was they were talking about a company called Chobani, which does the Greek yogurts. And I think part of the founder's story was when they moved from being kind of like a small SME and became a medium-sized business, and just that shift in scale, which was driven by demand of product, the manufacturing capability, the technology capability, the people capability, the way a business goes through this trajectory where technology now becomes so essential, you can't do anything without it,
Yeah, there are a lot of learning points you learn if you put in software. So whether you're the customer or the partner that's implementing it, or the supplier like SYSPRO, you've got to have the right processes. So if you've got bad processes in your company, if you've run them for 10 years, 20 years, you probably don't know there's an opportunity for improvement. I wouldn't say they're wrong, because obviously the guys are making money. I can't tell them they don't know how they're doing the business. So you've got to try and expose them in a way that actually it's processes first. Enabling a poor process is not going to bring you anywhere. And you can't, as a software company, say, well, we know. You've got to do it together. So you've got to have a good relationship. The second thing is you need the people that will use the system, and it will help them. So if you've got people who don't want to use the system, or they're not motivated, you need to do something about that. Because if one guy in the supply chain, like a procurement guy, doesn't do his or her job, they don't receive raw materials in, then you can't issue it to the factory, but you can see it's there, but the software will stop you issuing it to the factory, and you get into all sorts of poor problems. So actually the third thing that enables everything is the technology. I think people think the technology is the answer to everything, but it's not. It's just a tool. People use it and they apply it to their business processes. So I see SYSPRO as we're a software company. Of course, we write software, we do consulting, we do support. But really what our fundamental deliverable is to enable appropriately enable business processes of our customers, and to give them growth and grow with them. Software is how we do it, but there's a lot of people management involved in it too, in implementation.
Actually, it's so funny because I've been in the industry and working in technology for my entire career. But I remember the early days when we were hooking up people to the internet stuff. I had the chance to work with some big companies like Bamburi Cement and others, who were, at the time I recall, a big SAP customer in this market.
I know them.
And still many of the people working there, because I built their first website and stuff. And and I remember working with some of their people. And they told me, actually, Moses, when we're doing SAP, what we're discovering is that we are not actually, the software is not really being customized to us. We are customizing ourselves to the way the software works, which is based on best practices of how the best organizations run their business. Would you agree with that statement?
So having been in that position in that company, there was a sort of revolution of best practices, but I suspect now it's much more different, because people used to say, don't customize a system, systemize the customer. And
there's a philosophy at some point.
Yeah, there was. And that's because it's easier for software companies. Or it was. But that's not how you work now. And the best processes that were being pushed, I'm not saying by SAP, for example, but by some of the software vendors, the best processes were just the processes they could do. And that's not really the right way. So if you go to someone who's never used other than spreadsheets before, and you go in with this is a best practice, they sometimes take it that it is. So I think that's what I was saying earlier. You've got to have this discovery process. Yes, of course, we try and get proper, sensible, auditable, governed processes that make sense and are financially sensible and are efficient. But you've got to make sure you understand those little idiosyncrasies of the customer that might need a bit of changing. And you usually find software nowadays you can flex a little in approvals. Some companies you need to prove everything at every step, others you don't. So there's a lot of flexibility, but you're really looking for appropriate processes, because I'm not sure that the old best practices was known by the software companies, to be honest. I mean, I think it was a terminology that should have been appropriate processes, you know.
Yeah.
So, but you definitely do enable processes, so it does make sense to do the best you can.
Yeah.
But the best in one place isn't the best in another.
Absolutely.
And I think that's why Bamburi might have felt that, you know, I mean, if we implement in Brookside Dairies, we implement the software there, and then we go to Kenya wine agencies. It's entirely different. I mean, you can stop at the weekend as long as you've got stock and you supply people. But as Brookside said to me, I said, why are you 24/7? They said, well, cows don't stop at the weekend.
Oh.
So they've always got somebody doing transactions.
Those nuances, yeah.
You know, and that's different. And it's the same software. And it can be a huge difference, you know. Motor industry, fabricated metal is much more technical than some. And so it's really, to me, you've got to find a happy medium between appropriate practices that take into account the culture of the customer as well. I don't mean what religion or anything. I just mean the way they work. Some guys are really dynamic. Others are quite constrained. You need to be appropriate. You know, one size does not fit all. That's for sure.
So let's talk a little bit more about that. And I think, you know, we've come out of this period of the last 2 years and 2 months known as the Great Pandemic. And incidentally, I'm still working remotely. We have an office, a nice office that's been there for a long time. We haven't used it in over 2 years. I'm just wondering, what did that do to your business? What did that do to your customers? You know, did you have to adapt and sort of change the game as far as SYSPRO is concerned in how, you know, you did business? Because I imagine, if anything, you know, the pandemic probably put the spotlight more than ever on what your business does for your clients.
Yeah, it did. So on the 20th, I still remember the 27th of March, it was 2019, I'm losing the place, it was 20 or 19, whichever it was, 2 years ago. So it's been 20. We do some e-learning. You know, we've got an e-learning platform for SYSPRO called I think it's called Learn It Online. We did a special on it so that our customers could access it for free. We thought until the pandemic ended, but we did it for, I think, 3 to 6 months. And within, I think, we did it on, that was a Thursday, the 27th. By the Monday, we had, I think, 60 customers signed up already doing it.
Literally, wow.
So people had time on their hands was one thing, and they thought, well, this is a good time to do some learning, but they wouldn't pay for the licenses. And then we tried to convert them all, and we had quite a good conversion rate later where they paid on a subscription license. But it was incredible how that was one thing. They just went bang, well, they took up that campaign. And the other one was e-commerce, of course. A lot of food companies, booze companies, a lot of companies that we dealt with are dealing with, well, everyone deals with an end consumer, but they're dealing with people like you and me who buy things, not industrial companies. And so the one company we've got, Norman Goodfellas, in South Africa, they decided to start on their website taking orders. So they phoned and said, your integration doesn't work to our website. And what they had done is they decided not to integrate the website because they only got 10 orders a day on the internet. And they had a lady that sat next to it and took these orders.
No way.
So after the 27th of March, by a week later, they had 8,000 orders. And then it went up to 20,000 orders. It was like the internet when it started, you know, e-shopping. So we had a lot of customers starting to trade. And I think a lot of people buying food, especially from certainly in South Africa, all these e-commerce home deliveries, food deliveries have
just exploded,
skyrocketed. So it changed the whole supply chain, and also people didn't buy the same stuff because now a lot of people either didn't have a job or had been, you know, didn't get a pay rise or took a pay cut.
Yeah.
So they were much more picky about what they chose. So some of our customers supply the sort of higher LSMs of life. So Woolworths is a chain in South Africa. I think you've seen them here too. But their food chain, a lot of the food is made on companies that run SYSPRO. And they started, like you were saying, a Portuguese guy who made rolls and things like that, a guy who made chicken schnitzels and things. These guys radically had to change because some of the things they made people wouldn't buy. People bought only what they wanted. If they didn't have money, they
The basic stuff, yeah.
they downscaled on the brand. So then the guys that made the less exotic brands started to get more demand, which they didn't expect. And the guys who used to have it lost their demand. So they had tons of stock, and it's food. It doesn't last forever. So there was real trauma. And then they closed the ports. So anyone who imported anything, you're stuffed.
Wow.
You imagine you've got food in a container coming from Singapore or somewhere. You know, it's in a environmentally friendly container. If you send lemons from Africa or fruit, I mean Kenya, fruit, flowers, whatever, if it takes 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, whatever it is, to get to the destination, so your lemons arrive yellow. You know, they don't arrive green or black. They arrive correctly. Imagine if that's stalled for 18 months. You just write it off, and you can't get it off the container because the ship now can't get into most of the ports in the world.
Wow.
So logistics costs up to 300% more because of COVID. And somebody I know, they had a delivery 18 months late. Useless, you know. So there's ships going around the world. I was talking to Basco Paints, the paint company, this morning. They're saying that, you know, the delivery of imported materials, you're not quite sure where it's going to come, you know, what the route is. So you're going to be changing the route. It should come 2 hops to you, but it doesn't. So the COVID has taught people to be a bit more adaptive, and those that didn't aren't here now. So
it sounds to me like many of your customers, you know, started using the technology in different ways. Yep. Processes had to adapt. You know, the supply chain issues. You know, so massive disruptions in terms of how they're doing business, right?
Yeah, and we had recalls as well because things would go out of date, and you have to recall the product. So you need recall management in your software. If you don't have that, which we do, you decide that instead of recalling specific orders from retailers, you have to recall between dates. That could be 20 times as much stuff. So it's 20 times as expensive.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's functionality that people didn't think they would use, they started using, you know? So
I think what we were discovering is that pandemic, you know, what it did, it just put the spotlight on everything. You know, if you were weak, you know, you knew you were weak. If you're strong, you knew you're strong. If you needed to adapt and evolve, it became very, very clear to you as a business, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah, you did. I think and I think people had time to learn because, of course, we all did remote meetings. We stopped seeing each other.
Yeah.
We killed a few people on the way, I think, too, because, you know, in the early days, the death was quite bad. It's slowed down. I know the things...
Particularly in South Africa, it was horrible.
Yeah, it was bad. And so you closed down very tightly. It made huge difference the way businesses worked. And a lot didn't survive, or they changed. But it has been a period of opportunity for many to get things better. If you can't do as much work serving your customers, you can get your house in order better.
That's true.
And so quite a few, that's again why I go around seeing customers, because that's something they can do. Because if you own it already, it's time. It's their time and a bit of consulting. It makes sense to come out of it better than you went in.
That's true.
Because you're going to have a big change again when it comes out.
Really further optimizing, iterating, getting to a better place. So here's the thing, right? I think over the years, I mean, I don't know whether you'd agree with this statement, but I mean, many people do need ERPs. Many people are still maybe using a basic accounting software, they're not, kind of like looking at the bigger picture and how this can improve their business. I imagine that there's still massive opportunity in most of Africa and even East Africa, companies that are not where they need to be. Maybe they're on the wrong platform. Maybe they just don't believe in ERPs, which is something that I've seen where people are sort of skeptical around, do we need one? Is this the right one? The cost of it versus the value. And I think there's a time, ERPs generally had a bad rap, in the market. And I'm just wondering, like, when you look at SYSPRO and, talk a little bit about, how do you deal with the skeptics? How do you get people to become believers and derive the full potential of these platforms? And what has been your experience when you're dealing with these sort of, I call them negative moments, perhaps, negative scenarios in the case of SYSPRO ERPs?
Yeah, so I think software companies earned their bad reputation by by being aloof and not really as customer oriented as they should be. So as I said, pushing the system, sell it, find them, get rid of them,
Systemize the client.
systemize the client. And I think those days have changed. And
Yeah.
we also, I'm sure, in the past did the same thing. But I think the world is, and so have customers matured. They're much more used to dealing with software companies. So they push us into doing the right things. We do the right things. We work with them. I'm losing track of your question here, actually. Just give me it again.
Yeah, I mean, just the idea that there was this moment, or whether it still exists or not, where people just were really skeptical about ERPs, and
Yeah, that's right.
there were so many bad experiences, and people were like, it never worked, it doesn't work, you know?
Yeah. Sorry, that's right. So everyone was saying, all the software companies would say, no, we've got huge retention. Well, we do have huge retention. It's difficult to change an ERP system. It's like changing your heart. It's not something you do every day. So you have to, the skeptics you have to cover with, first of all, you've got to get some sort of trustworthy relationship going. That might have some commercial side to it. You might, discuss your commercials. But I think what we typically do is we find customers who have, the best ones are those that were skeptics, who got the software, and then you get a case study and say, thank goodness we went this way. These are the things we learned. And those customers, we've got a user group, for example, where our customers get together. Well, they do it remotely. We say to them, don't just sell that. We'll sell the software. We want you to tell people what it really was like. So these guys will say, well, actually, this wasn't done properly, and it wasn't our fault. I mean, it wasn't the customer's fault. It was SYSPRO's fault, but they owned up to it, and we got it done. And this was hard. Never underestimate the effort you need in this area. They give a bit of realism and understanding that it's possible.
Yeah.
And there is a bit of honesty out there.
Yeah.
So that's but there are skeptics. I can tell there's another reason. So your government's making some changes on the how you do invoicing and
the ETRs. Yes.
Yeah. So one reason people don't want software is because they don't want people knowing what they're doing.
Yes.
And I think governments, especially in Africa, but all over the world, are toughening up, and they're insisting that you have systems so to control those sort of things. So some of the skeptics are. One was this Norman Goodfellas, a guy who owns the place, said, I used to have a fat wad of money in my back pocket. Now I've got none because I've got your software. But they increased their turnover by a huge amount, and they completely reduced their costs up until COVID. They had some horrible problems during COVID because that industry, the booze industry, was closed down. But if you speak to them today, they'll tell you it's the best thing they did. Because they didn't have control of their business. They were using spreadsheets and little bits of this and little bits of that.
So there's no resilience, no insights, nothing.
Nothing integrated. Everybody had their own information, nothing coordinated. So it was almost, the more cash in my pocket, the luckier I am. And how it got there, I don't know.
But you know what it is people are invested in the status quo. And sometimes that's the biggest hindrance, right? People have they know that if we move to this new transparent scenario, then it stops them from having things the way they used to be.
And everyone asks you, what's the return on investment on an IT investment? Well, there are some things you just have to spend on. You've got to have control and visibility and all those good things. Now that's worth money. Like a brand, it has a value.
Yeah.
It might not be shillings, dollars, rands, whatever it is. It does have a value, but you only start seeing the value once you've spent the money, unfortunately. So it's one of these things you kind of have to do the surgery and then recover. Yes, you can do it progressively, and there's some tricks you can do there to spread the cost, and then you get into cloud and all of that story and subscription pricing. But the return on investment is there's a sunk cost, whatever you do. You will still get your money back, but you might not get back in the first year.
It might be a journey, of course.
But you might go out of business in the first year. How good is that? So
Yeah.
I mean, not for the software, for not implementing software. For not controlling your business, you can lose your business.
Now that you mentioned the cloud there, I'm just wondering again, maybe as part of the pandemic, maybe before that, are you seeing a massive transition to customers moving from, on-premise to cloud or hybrid in terms of how they're deploying your solutions?
Everyone's asking for quotes. In America, a lot of people go cloud. How many is a lot? It's not a big percentage, not in ERP. On things like business intelligence, maybe some HR systems, there's other systems that lend themselves more, Salesforce, for example, lend themselves more to cloud. But yeah, we are having to we're writing for software as a service. I think the people we deal with, the vast majority, just don't want to have to run the IT. They want to get it out of their business. It's not their core functionality, not their core business. It's like the old hosting. So you get this infrastructure as a service rather than the software as a service. But it's on the cloud. So instead of being on a hosted service, it's on a cloud somewhere, and they don't necessarily know where. So cloud to a lot of people is just moving it away like we did in the old hosting. But there's a big change in the technology we use because of the internet. Full software as a service. I don't think some of the companies know what the difference is. I don't mean the software companies, the users. They just want the system to work. They want to run their business, and they want to get the cost down of the running of the software. And they don't want to have 2 or 3 people that need to do system administration and maybe tweak a few things. They want somebody else on the and they pay it as a service. However, a lot of it's based on American pricing. So in Africa, it's expensive.
In relative terms, right?
In relative terms, yeah. So America, definitely. Here, yes, quite a few customers on cloud already. Everyone asks, but not everybody moves.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a gradual transition. And I think we're seeing the advent of, I think we have nodes now with AWS. I think Microsoft Azure is also setting up points.
So, we've got Microsoft. So we're a Microsoft shop. So we're on Azure. So we use Azure as our hosting platform. So we've got to deal with Microsoft. I'm not sure, but I thought they were building a hub here.
Yes, I think that's coming through as well. I think with Liquid or something.
Yeah, so that'll make a difference, because in the early days from South Africa, we were hosting in like Singapore and Ireland, and our internet was very expensive. Still is. It's better here, but that really kills the operating cost. Kills it if your internet's not cheap.
Yeah.
But, all of that will settle out, and I'm sure cloud will be the solution for everyone in the not too distant future.
As we speak about cloud, of course, the other question I have is, SYSPRO, unless I'm mistaken, does a lot of business across the continent. It is your origin. This is where you're from. How do you tweak and tune, the SYSPRO solution so that, there's the mobile first consumer and business, the element of mobile money, probably for your customers to acquire payments on the platforms.
Yep.
Reliable bandwidth, reliable electricity, as pricing. How do you make yourselves Africa relevant as a platform, as a business?
Well, we learn every day. Internet costs are ridiculous in some parts of Africa. Internet speeds are horrendous. Up here, it's pretty good. Ethiopia, the power breaks twice a day. The internet goes up 5 or 6 times a day. It can cause havoc with systems, So you're right. The basic infrastructure needs to be sound, or you've got to manage around that with, backups of your own or your own generation or whatever. Also, I think what you find also is people are looking at hosting, like if they're a South African company and they've got people all over, they're trying to sort of commandeer the rest of Africa. Mm-hmm. There is a move for some of them to look at cloud in South Africa. Well, cloud from South Africa, it might not be in South Africa, and all their other countries go off their own cloud. So there's some of those moves that seem to be Africa-centric. But I think the biggest issues are in people's minds. As I say, they want it out of their building. That's the first thing. They want to concentrate on their work. Does it make sense for a small company or a big company? Well, it depends what your objectives are. It depends how expensive technical people are. If you've got very expensive technical people in a very small African country, it might be cheaper for you to host and use people from but they're in a totally different country. So there's a lot of pricing aspects. But the subscription pricing is, to me, you can sell anything on subscription pricing. You're just taking it off your balance sheet and putting it onto operational expenses. So from a cash flow point of view, it makes sense. But when does it stop? So if you're buying 1 million shillings or 10 million or 20 million shillings worth of software and implementation, you pay it up front, you depreciate it, and in 3 or 5 years, you probably keep paying. If you go on the cloud, basically people look at 5 years, how much should it cost to put a bit of inflation on it, or CPI, and then they divide it by 60 months. They say that's what it'll cost. But it doesn't stop after 60 months. It keeps going. So is cloud cheaper? It depends.
Yeah. Most times that's sort of classic question around, do you insource or outsource? Sometimes when you do things yourself, versus, continuously pushing it out, cost benefit, what does that look like over time? So, and again, it also depends where the business is and what's practical.
I think it does. And I think people outsourced in the old days because they didn't have the technical staff, and they found it different to what they did, out of their scope of knowledge. And they didn't trust the people they had, so they gave it to the Data of the world, all these people, to outsource the services. And I think they became fairly priced, but they were obviously very successful because they made a lot of money, the hosting companies, as you know. But that's not a bad thing. They still did a good job, and they supplied a market need. So it's really depending on the market need. I think people in Africa are really worried about their data. They don't trust it being outside the country.
That's true, yeah.
So you don't know where your data is, and the law just never catches up with IT. So, personal protection of personal information, industry information, company information, well, if it's stored in China, you don't want that, or Russia, you wouldn't want that at the moment.
Oh, no.
but it could be, so that's what people worry about as well.
Yeah. So, question, you've been at SYSPRO, you've sort of worked in this ERP space for quite some time. And I'm just curious, I love the fact that you have this intimacy with your clients, that you're coming out, you're pressing hands, you're discussing their problems, you're coming up with solutions, working with your partners on the ground and such. And I'm just curious in terms of when you look at the next 2 to 5 years, based on what you're seeing now, post-pandemic, market dynamics, geographical, or I think what they call geopolitics and all these things. But where do you think, where do you see yourselves going in the next 2 to 5 years? If you had a crystal ball, what does that look like right now?
East Africa has always been high growth in Africa. It's pretty competitive, but it's not as competitive as California, where everybody writes a software package. We see what we can do is very suitable to Africa. Or that sounds terrible. Very suitable to the types of customers we deal with and the way we deal with them. We very much customer first. I'm not saying we all are, but we try to think like the customer and feel what they feel. Some of them will tell you that's nonsense, we don't do it, but we genuinely try, and when we get it right, it works. And you can talk about some of the things that the IT industry is bad for, like sometimes support is slower than you want, but if it's a very tricky problem, it's very hard to fix in software. That's not the customer's problem, that's ours. So you need to keep communicating with them, give them a workaround and say, we know this isn't the answer, but this will keep you going. This is a genuinely difficult problem, and then you're faster on the other ones. You just have to keep the communication up. So not sure that they'd all say we come and try and keep close to them, but we do because we feel we didn't in the past, especially up here in East Africa, particularly Kenya. I think some of them don't really want to see you face to face, but I've noticed through COVID, they're actually much more, they don't want to be pestered, but when you see them and you push to see them, it's good and you have good meetings. If you don't make the effort to see them when you visit and they find out you were here, you're in, what. So it's not a remote business. The IT business is not, some of the technology is, but there's still people. You've got to see people. Whether it's the partners, we have to see our partners. We have to try and help them. We do our things together. We fight. We sort stuff out. They look after our customers. It's our software, so we look after the customers. But we support our partners. If they're the guys appointed to that customer, then we try and ensure that the customer's being looked after. And if we pick things up, we feed it back to the partner and say, you should be aware of this. In fact, we'd rather go with them to the customer, but we don't always manage it. So.
That's wonderful. So it's very much a sort of proximity, as much in person as possible, spending more time getting to the detail of the issues and how you can solve them.
Well, you can talk on a remote call with 10 people and 5 techies. You talk around the problem and then you go and have a cup of coffee and you don't forget about it, but something else hits you in the face. When you come and see somebody, I noticed this morning, we were talking about a costing problem about importing. I didn't know why these people had a problem with it. And then they explained what they're doing now and how important it was and how their costs can change and it can affect their price. And you think, now I see. So, and I wouldn't have done that if I'd done it on a phone call or a remote meeting. So you have to have it. And not everybody comes up from South Africa. We've got an office of 5 people here.
Okay.
We've got probably 20 or 30 partner resources at the moment, and not different partners, but in the partner community and independents floating around. And the crystal ball would be, we would like to grow here. We think we will grow here. That's our plan. We want to improve what we do up here and generally, but from an African point of view, because that's what I'm part of, South Africa is becoming, of course, you're in South Africa, you look at your own living room and want that to be the best. But I think our country is going so slowly in South Africa. We're doing quite well there. But I think we are very suited, and we all believe we're very suited to this African manufacturing entrepreneurial type of environment where people started their own businesses and it's got too big. That's where we see growth. We see partners growing, more partners, same in Ethiopia, same in Tanzania. But business, what do? Do you get the support structure in the region first, or do you get the customers first? Because our major support is in Joburg. That you can do because of remote calls and remote desktops and all sorts of things. But yeah, our intention is to grow. And our intention is to, with the existing customers we have, is get them to a state where they are getting full value. Because I think if you leave a customer to themselves, be you a partner or a software supplier, they start getting off the sort of peak of what they should be. And then they have to spend a lot of money. Rather spend a bit of money all the time, have a roadmap going forward. This is where my business is going. I better budget for this IT. And also communicate about it on a regular basis. Then I think it's a far better way of spending money. I think you get value. You don't talk about price any longer. You're really saying, let's maximize the value you can get from the process and the functionality of the software. We're not here to rape and pillage you with buying the wrong modules, for example, which our industry is, I think, guilty of. So,
historically, yeah.
Because the more you buy, the bigger the discount, And that's like anything. Sometimes they do it in the food business. You buy too much because you get a discount. You put it in your warehouse and it goes off. Well, it's not good business.
Yeah.
So discounts, of course, are important, but they're not everything. So it's spreading the value, spreading the cost. That's the way I see it working. And I guess subscription pricing helps that.
That's true.
Or just planning it in a roadmap and helps the steps, And you get much closer that way.
Given that your industry, your business is largely focused on manufacturing, I think I've seen also a very interesting trend in my travels in the region, whether it's Tanzania, Rwanda, Uganda, which is obviously places where you must have customers. But what I think I've seen in the last 20 years odd is, historically Kenya was sort of more of a net exporter of manufactured goods. And then now you see products coming from, other markets, finished products from, Tanzania, Uganda, dairy products, juices and all this. So I imagine as you're looking at that sort of crystal ball, 2 to 5 years, one of the things obviously that's happening is that you're seeing the emergence of this entrepreneurial activities in the region and companies that need, manufacturing software like yourselves. That's clearly going to be a massive growth market from what I can tell.
Well, that's our hope, and our intention is to be there, and service it because we focus on it. We were probably guilty in the past of if somebody said, "Can you do it?" everyone would say yes, and you get yourself into trouble that way as a software company. So we're quite focused on who we try and look at. So that's the manufacturing distribution, and it's not that well serviced by everybody, and they have a great need, for systems. And this place is getting bigger, and you're right. The region here acts like a region. SADC doesn't act like a region. Every country is like an individual country. I suppose there's an element of that here, but you can see that the companies here are dealing in Uganda and Rwanda.
Exactly.
In Kenya, they've all got branches or companies there. Not so much in Ethiopia, but some. Sub-Saharan Africa is one of them there in Tanzania, Ethiopia, and here. But yeah, so you're finding regional customers, not just Kenyan customers.
Yes,
and
exactly.
Kenyan customers who have been with us for years becoming regional or branching into different types of business.
Exactly.
And this Tattoo City, that type of thing is helping as well.
Wow.
And we see quite a few of our customers moving there.
Yeah. Great. So I'm just curious now. This is more of an open-ended question, just to wind us up, and I'm just trying to think if there's any, key nuggets or insights you might want to share from your time doing all this kind of amazing ERP work with SYSPRO. And before that, are there any things that come to mind? Two, three, four things that, you know, given the nature of the kind of products you're selling and the solutions you're selling with SYSPRO that anyone listening to this would find useful, either as a business owner or somebody working in a manufacturing business in this part of the world. Is there any nuggets that come to mind?
Lots, but a few would be, let us into your business. I know it's like we need to know how you do your business. If we can't be customer first and think like you, if you're a potential or an existing customer, unless we talk about your business issues together. So if you're very secretive or you don't want to share things with a software company, you're not going to get the optimum solution. And I think that's been the case with not just us, a lot of software vendors where people have thought, oh, there's not value. That's one. Two is don't buy business IT. I mean, don't buy technology, anything, all the IoT, all that sort of stuff. Don't buy it in isolation. Look ahead, see where your business is going. If you've got some idea to move into mobility or a lot more collection of data, then start thinking that you're going to have clothing or whatever, bringing information in that you can analyze so that you can do your business better. Don't just do one little project. Think of them all. Do a roadmap, proper business roadmap that's enabled by IT. You don't have to buy it all. But if you do it in a staccato, one by one bit, a journey rather, you get 3 steps down and you realize you made a wrong step in number 1. And so that's another thing. Roadmap, think longer term. I mean, maybe 3 years or 5 years. And we all used to know the Japanese thought 200 years. That's maybe a bit excessive. But that's one. So you've got to be able to get, I suppose, into bed together. That's the first one. You've got to trust each other. No one's out there to steal all the money from you. We want to do good business because we want you to feel the value. Have a roadmap. It makes it easier for everybody. It doesn't mean you'll necessarily follow it entirely, but at least it gives people an idea. You can see what you're going to have to spend. Software companies can see what they might have, their revenue might be, what skills they might need, all of that. Keep your data clean.
Clean data.
Clean data. Because, how can you plan if you never... One of the keys in manufacturing and distribution is if you buy goods and it's 100 items and they deliver 90 and there are 10 left, just close the order. You don't leave it open with 10 because these systems are they're dumb. These material requirements planning algorithms say, well, we've got to get 10 more there. They'll come one day, but they're never going to come because the guy delivered 90. He couldn't give you 100. Same on a sales order. If you deliver to a customer 50 instead of 100, either speak to the customer and say, do you want us to keep this open and deliver the 50 or must we close it? And some customers will say, no, close it. We'll add it to the next order. Because all these little bits of open orders create demand and supply that's not real and completely destroys your planning after a while. I mean, we go to companies who have got tens of thousands of little open orders. 1 or 2 here makes a hell of a difference when you've got 10,000 1 or 2s, especially when you're talking about stock. And the relationship between the finished goods and what you need, make sure that the lead times and things, all these parameters, there's a bit of hard work in putting in a bit of business, well, particularly manufacturing IT. If you want to finish goods with the right things, it's like a car, and everyone understands a car, it needs the wheels, it needs the engine, I mean, it needs millions or 20,000 parts, I think. If you order 3 wheels instead of 4 because your system says it only uses 3 wheels, that's not going to work. So those are some of the things. Clean data. You should be working together. Have a more strategic view of what IT is. It's part of enabling your strategy. There's probably a lot more.
Well, Doug, thank you so much for being on the...
Don't overpay.
Don't overpay as well. But thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I've learned so much around the myths and the realities of ERPs, in particular what also makes SYSPRO unique, and really, I think, doing an amazing job on the ground in Kenya. And listening to the names of the companies that you're working with in the region really gives me confidence that you are on the right track. And I can't, wait to see what you accomplish in the next 2 to 5 years in East Africa. But thank you so much. We're delighted to have you as a guest on the Pure Digital Passion podcast with Moses Kemibaro, and wishing you all the best going forward with the SYSPRO ERP in the East Africa region.
Thank you. Great talking to you. That's a great region.